Hey, everybody. Welcome to Leadership. I am your host, Brett Miller, for this week, at least. We'll kind of rotate through the crew here so you get to know us all. But guys, this is Leadership. This is a podcast where we're going to bring together the voices from different parties, right? Different perspectives so that we can actually have some civil discussion. I think that's something that's greatly lacking in the world today, is being able to have civil discourse. So we're going to do that. We're going to engage in some real conversations. We're going to have pull from people from Libertarian side, Republican side, Democrat side, and we're going to have an actual conversation. We're going to dive into some issues that are important to people. This is stuff that's on the hearts and minds of Americans, and we want to share that with you guys. Our goal with this is we actually want to bridge divides. We want to be able to foster real conversations so we can talk about things that matter, so that hopefully we can come to an agreement and an understanding on the way to lead the country. So whether you're passionate about whichever side you're on, doesn't matter. Hopefully you're looking for a fresh perspective, but that's where we're going to kind of guide you through this. So with that, we're going to jump into today's discussion, which is, can you legislate morality? Which I think is a fun topic. I know it's a hot button for a lot of people. So let's jump into it. Dion, why don't you kick us off for today and kind of give your perspective on things?
Okay. I mean, this is easy. No. I'm going to say no. You can't legislate. You can't legislate morality, nor should you. But to be more, to go into more detail. So I would say that just from the human condition, I think that it is impossible to legislate morality, in that it is impossible to create a moral being through the law, because ultimately, while sometimes the law carries with it a carrot, more often than not, the law really is the threat of the stick. And for our listeners and viewers out there, for people who don't know, I come from a Christian background, and so this is also kind of the heart of the Christian religion, which is that it was, hey, the serpent said, if you just know what is good and what is evil, then you can be like God, and you can just choose to do the good things and not do the evil things, and you can be in charge of your own life. And as we saw, for those of you that know the story in Genesis, that didn't quite work out very well. Most of us know what is good and what is bad, and yet it doesn't make us better people knowing that. It may make us act better, usually, because we're afraid of things like being fined, going to jail, or whatever. But I don't really think that the law changes your morals. So that's kind of where I stand. Will's looking at me like, dude, you're crazy.
Not at all. I mean, in general, I agree with you. I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for this to go. I'm waiting for the abortion discussion to start.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, though, is it invites the question, what is morality and how do we define it, right? So lawyer here, you always got to define the term you're working from. So where are you going with that, Dion?
I have a Merriam-Webster definition.
That's good. Yes, let's start with the baseline. What is the Merriam-Webster definition?
Okay, so Merriam-Webster says that morality is conformity to ideals of right human conduct.
Okay, yeah. And so, I think we do legislate. So because I struggled with this all week. We do legislate morality. I mean, there are certain things that we, as a society, I don't think disagree on. Like we've all come to, I don't think anyone's saying we should legalize, non-consensual sexual acts with anyone, right? That should not be a crime in America. I don't think anyone's arguing that murder should be permitted. Well, some people may be hinting at bringing back the purge or bringing the purge to real life, but in reality, we're not.
Just for one day.
But the purge is a movie, it's a fictional idea. In theory, we have not, as a society, we've agreed that those types of acts are things that we're not going to condone. But when I was thinking about this topic, I was like, well, do we outlaw those acts because they're immoral, or do we outlaw those acts because they cause disorder and they cause chaos? And so the way the law seeks to create order, and I wonder if a lot of the things that we outlaw isn't necessarily because it's immoral, or it's more that to allow those things in society would create chaos. And so then the question becomes, what is the role of morality as far as the rule of law? I know I just asked a lot of questions. I don't think I answered any, but that's kind of how I was thinking about this discussion as we came into this week. So it's interesting to hear the way you phrased it, that it's impossible to do it, Dion. But I think, go on.
Did I get the hint that maybe you thought that we could?
I think that we can from a baseline. I think the question becomes, there's certain baseline items that I agree that we as a society should legislate or regulate. But I think that baseline for me is relatively low, and it should, like kind of what we were getting at last week. It's universal, big topics, like basically, I think issues of morality that affect other people, that impact the people around you. And if your immoral act is going to victimize someone else or infringe on somebody else's rights, I think that's where government should step in, and that's where it needs to be governed. And so I think that's I think that's where I see a lot of like my policy leanings when I look at certain policies of when and how certain things should be allowed or not allowed. One of the moral issues that I think defined a lot of our 20s and early 30s was gay marriage, right? I remember I was a personnelist when I was in the Air Force. And so I think all of you guys were married while you're in active duty. Every time you get married, you have a kid, you got to come bring them into DEERS. That's how you get health insurance and all that. I managed those programs. And, I always knew of people that I served with that had same-sex partners before marriage was legal. They had families, they didn't have the ability to have their families recognized, right? Because at the time, the Defense of Marriage Act was still in effect. And that was interesting. And of course, don't ask, don't tell. But I remember seeing that, and I always thought that was morally wrong. But that was the law at the time, right? I always thought that was immoral. And it really shaped a lot of my political beliefs based on people in my personal life and the way I grew up. And now we've seen the law has shifted and has shown that, I think it was always an immoral law. And now Obergefell happened, gay marriage is legal. And in the military, now you see, you have plenty of, different versions of families, and everyone's dependents are in the system. They can get healthcare, they're recognized. And that changed in just the last 20 years, So I think you can, but it comes back to how should you, and where do you draw the line?
So I got kind of a question on that then. Why does there need to be marriage law?
Because I think if you're, I would say the lawyer answer is we assign legal rights to married people. We do. There's so many different rights that you have as a married couple, whether it comes to end of life decisions, whether it comes to just like next of kin, right? So if you're married, you're automatically legally your spouse is your next of kin unless you designate otherwise, right? And there's just all these decision-making rights when it comes to the assumption of who's parented, right? If you're married in the state of California, the assumption is that the two people who are married are the parents of the child that's a product of that marriage, right? Again, there's always loopholes or ways to get around that. But there are many rights in this country that are provided to people who are married, right? And in the U.S., legally, marriage is a legal contract. So, it provides different liberties to people, or I don't know if you call it liberties or freedoms, but it changes things for folks. Again, in the military, I would see all the time, something happens to someone and their next of kin makes a lot of decisions because, mortuary also fell under me and casualty. And there were instances where you had like a fiance and then parents that were in conflict when someone would pass. And it would be the parents because they were the next of kin. But had that wedding happened a week later, or whatever, had the timing been different, the fiance would have been the one to make the decisions. So I do think it matters.
But couldn't the individual have designated the fiance as next of kin?
Not under you. Not for like. Yes and no. It was difficult for certain things. For legal decisions, You would have had to have, you could, yes, you can, but it's not the default. And a lot of people, we all had troops. They're 18. They're coming right out of high school. A lot of them, they're not thinking like, well, what happens if I get into a motorcycle accident? We would brief them on, hey, you should think about that. But I saw it in real life. So I agree with the whole, should we or do we need to? But the reality is our system provides legal rights to married people. And as long as it does, then when you create a system that makes it, people don't have equal access to that institution, then then you're creating an unequal society. And I guess from one of the things, I think that in itself is immoral.
So I want to let Will talk, but I'm just going to say this real quick. I think, one way to handle that is to have it as a legal construct and make sure that it's open to everybody. Mm-hmm. Another way is to just get the government out of it in the first place, because people and entities enter into contracts with each other all the time without the government being involved in the contracting process. And so you could have an arrangement where you go, okay, well, this is my spouse, so she's my next of kin, or I'm not married, but I have this girlfriend, and for right now, she's my next of kin because we're that close, whatever it is, right? So anyways, Will, I don't want to step on you.
So before I get to what I was going to say, just to push back a little bit on what you were just saying, if I understand correctly, you're saying people enter into contracts all the time without the government, but breaking that there are laws against breaking that contract. So the only way that those contracts between two people work is if there's laws that prevent you from breaking those contracts. So there has to be some level of government involvement, right?
Yeah, the enforcement of a contract, that's how I make a living. Yeah.
But that assumes that the contract in extreme has to be enforced by a third party, right? I think that most times two parties will abide by the contract, mostly because they don't want to go to court, right? We can't really know how many cases where one party or the other breaks part of the contract and then, whatever clause there is for restitution comes into play that don't make it to your court, right?
Yeah, but
there's no way to know that.
The type of contract we're talking about is a marriage, and we know that half of marriages end in divorce, right? So in theory, yes, it's nice to think that people are going to agree, and then when if there's some type of disagreement, they can figure it out. But in practice, we know that's not true, right? So I don't know how you track and enforce these agreements when they're broken, other than right now, that's the role the government has, especially when it comes to marriage.
It reminds me a little bit of like the Wild West. Like we have an agreement, we shook each other's hand, and if one of us breaks it, we're going to go, someone's getting shot. If there's no legal remedy, if there's no law, if I can't take you to court for it, then I take it into my own hands. But in general, so I tend to agree with Thea that, okay, murder is immoral. We have laws against it. We don't do that. And we can all agree that's bad. And then on the other extreme, banning books is being conducted based on one person's morality that might be different than someone else's. Somewhere between murder and banning books is a threshold of, okay, at what point do we draw the line and say that we can't legislate past this line? And Thea, I think if I understood, that line is a lot closer to murder than it is to banning books. Like it's a low threshold. Is that what you were saying?
That's what I was saying. Yeah.
So, there's certain things that we should be able to agree on. These are all bad things and we can legislate that. But it does tend, I do also agree that I think that line has to do with where my immorality affects someone else.
So I will challenge your everyone agrees that murder is wrong.
Who on this call thinks murder is good?
Hold on.
What is this call, right?
Because it depends on how you define murder, right? And I think so. We do have a
The
lawyer
unlawful
here,
killing of
but
another.
I believe
The-
of another.
Or if you
person.
murder, normally first degree murder,
Whoa.
like homicide. Homicide is the unlawful killing of another, and then if you want to go into murder, it would require what is it? Deliberation and afterthought.
Forethought,
malice and afterthought, right?
Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah.
But let's just call murder, homicide. It's the unlawful killing of another person. Okay. So, and the reason why and I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, but I think it's important for us to realize that one, during episode 1, we let everybody know we all served in the military, right? So we all engaged in the primary business, no matter what our actual jobs were. The primary business of the military is to kill people and break their stuff, right? And we all probably know, I don't think any of us actually took part in direct combat. I know I took a lot of indirect fire and that sucked, but I never killed anybody. But we at least know somebody who did, right? Yeah. And then you got to go, well, was that lawful or was it not? Right. I mean, there are people who would say we were not there lawfully.
Yeah. But I mean,
right?
But LOAC is the thing. We have rules of combat. Like, I mean, I don't want to shift the topic of this.
We have rules. Did the other side agree to it?
Yeah. But as far as, okay, if we're looking at it from the American perspective, right? Like one of the things that I struggle with now when I look at how certain conflicts are being, pursued by other countries, some of our allies, is I'm thinking to myself, I understood all of these, all the LOAC seems to be out the window, right? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That doesn't seem proportional. That's interesting. That doesn't seem targeted. So Will taught at the academy. I had to take all that stuff at the academy, and believe it or not, here I am 20 years later. It's still in my brain. And I think what allowed me to be in the military, I was at the academy on 9/11, right? And what allowed me to come out and go on active duty. And again, I was a mortuary officer. I saw a lot of our folks that lost their lives and what that looked like in real time in Afghanistan and whatnot. But the way I was able to justify it, I guess, based on my own morals, is there was a set of rules that in lines we had said we wouldn't cross as a nation, right? Whether the other person does or not, that's, it's like I can't control the other person, but I can control, what I believe in and what I'm standing up for. I think when you make that more broad argument about morality in our society, I think the argument is, there are still going to be things that, you can say, yes, there is such thing as lawful killing, but here are all the rules. And here's the box you have to stay in. And once you go outside that box, we're saying no. And I'm okay with that, where I do think that there's lines you shouldn't cross. Right. And I think when we start talking about morality in a larger sense and the way it plays out with the political parties, where I get uncomfortable is where it feels like I am having to now change the way I live based on someone's discomfort, and like Will was saying, on the end of the spectrum where I just don't think the government should be involved, right? Or I don't think that I should have to, my rights should be infringed upon or my freedom should be infringed upon because somebody else is religious and their religion dictates X, Y, and Z. Therefore, they think the government should also align with their religious beliefs. That's where I start to think that now this is not the role of government, where we are crossing the line and now I have to deal with because you think something's immoral, now suddenly it impacts my freedoms. And that's where I start to get uncomfortable. And I think that's where you see, a lot of the culture wars when we talk about the moral issues. That's where it's like, that's, where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah,
Brett,
I tend to agree that,
you haven't said anything in a while.
The whole point of LOAC and rule of law and Geneva Conventions and everything else is to put those boundaries to be able to conduct warfare in a morally acceptable way. Sorry, Brett.
No, you're fine. I was actually waiting for you to talk anyway, Will, because I don't think you got to finish what you were saying before.
No, I'm good.
So, I mean, just kind of from the initial question of, right, can you legislate morality? If I'm going to step in on that aspect, I don't think that you can. I don't think it's possible to legislate morality. because that is an internal compass, right? You're going to have people that disagree with the law, but they're still going to abide by it because they're citizens of that country and they want to maintain order. But at the same time, it always comes down to the discussion of why do you have locks on your doors, right? If everybody was moral and upstanding, it wouldn't be an issue. You wouldn't need locks, right? So it's kind of that idea, like locks on doors only keep honest people honest. Because if somebody wants to break into my house, whether I have locks on the doors or not, they're going to come in, right? And that's based on their moral code. It doesn't matter what the law says. And there's a lot of discussion around that too, because you start thinking about like, okay, well, who gets to define morality? We started a little bit of the discussion last time when we were talking about the American Revolution versus the French Revolution, right? And the fact that our Constitution is written off of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the French Constitution, the first part of it is fraternity, right? So you have that balance of fraternity, like I mentioned last time, is another word for group. And so if my group says that something is moral or amoral, then that determines the law. But then if my group gets displaced and a new group comes in and that group is stronger and they now determine the moral high ground, it's a changing thing, right? Because if you guys, I'm sure you guys have studied a little bit of history with all being military, right? Humans are notoriously bad at agreeing on anything, right? So if we're trying to base a standard off of human morals, I think we're going to come at an impasse. And understanding, and you don't have to be religious to understand this, but it's a matter of our country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And that's where you have the principles of do not murder, do not steal, do not commit adultery. All those kind of things are in line with that. And that's where you have to look at what is morality and how does that stand. And, President John Adams had mentioned that our Constitution is designed for a moral and religious people and that it is inadequate to govern any other body of people because you're going to constantly digress from that. Right? We're humans. We're fallible. Like we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. We have different upbringings, different circumstances that play into it. So we're never going to come into agreement really on anything that is of our making. There has to be something that stands outside of it that says this is the path you have to take. And then the laws have to back that up. Right. And that's why we're talking about like the rule of murder. I know Dion was kind of going this route. At least I think he was talking about like it's, the unlawful killing of a person. Well, how do you define a person?
There you go.
Right?
There we go. That's how we're, because I was wondering how you kind of fold it in.
It's going to come up. But when anybody mentions the argument of laws and morality, that's the big one that comes into play.
Yeah.
My personal take on marriage, just to see that one, the Republican standpoint, it's for the most part, the Republican standpoint on things is let people live, right? Minimize government, keep them out of it. And my thoughts are marriage from the standpoint of purpose of law and tax benefits and death benefits and all those kinds, that's a legal thing, right? So if you want to do that, fine. Stop calling it a marriage, call it a civil union. Right. That's where people get so up in arms about this stuff is because at least because like Dion, my background, I come from a Christian background. And the idea of marriage is that God defined marriage. But if you want to talk about a civil union, something that the government dictates, that's a different thing. Right. And if you want all the benefits that go along with having a partner in life and all the legality that goes with it, fine. I don't have a problem with that. So anyway, that's just my take on that. But let's kind of come back around here to the definition of a person.
So, Brett, just to play devil's advocate, you said that no, we can't define or we can't legislate morality. But then you said, the country was founded on Judeo-Christian values, and that's where, thou shalt not kill comes from. And it seemed like you were arguing that we should or could legislate morality as long as it's that set of morality.
No, not at all. It's the fact that is the basis for like at least my moral code, right? Is that I base my moral code on something that is outside of me because I know that I'm fallible and fall from that. And so for me, that law comes from God. So when you talk about legislating morality, it's the same thing. Whether you make murder legal or illegal, if somebody wants to kill somebody, they're going to, right? If somebody wants to steal something, they're going to. You can't legislate what's on somebody's heart. Yeah, you can have a law in place for it.
But I mean, I don't think yes, there's a deterrent effect, but I think the issue becomes if somebody decides to commit murder or to steal or whatnot, then we as society have said they have to be held accountable, and that there's punishments and consequences that come as a result of them choosing to commit those acts. So I don't think that anyone believes this. You have the law in place to prevent it from happening, but we do say we have the law in place to set the boundaries and say if you do it, we may remove you from society and imprison you. And up to the possibility you could lose your own life as a result of committing certain crimes. And we do that for some things.
That's because as a society, and that's because as a society, we've determined that is an unacceptable behavior. Yeah. Right. There is some level where law comes into play because we need those kind of things. But again, if you have an internal compass that I say killing is wrong and I'm not going to kill anyone, I don't need any law to tell me that I shouldn't do that, or that it's a wrong thing to do, right? Yeah. Now, as far as consequences and stuff, yes, I understand where that comes into play because there has to be some type of reciprocity for certain things. So again, these are all gray areas, of course, but.
So I would posit that you can get to the point where, things like murder are legislated topics, because you can make the argument that you can't have a functioning society if people are not secure in their persons and property. And so you can actually get there from just a pure functional standpoint, that a society doesn't function if people cannot be secure to live and be healthy and safe. And then the things that are theirs belong to them and aren't for the taking by other people. You don't need morality to make those laws, because otherwise you have complete anarchy and it's, survival of the fittest. And that's how society collapses.
Can I ask a question then? When we talk about, so I guess when I was thinking of the laws that I see as attempting to legislate morality, it's things like the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, a lot of these anti-trans laws, that are restricting the ability of trans people to exist in certain ways in certain spaces. To me, those laws, I interpret them as based on someone's morality of how people should live and who they are and how they should exist. And because the rights of those individuals seems to go against someone else's morality, we're seeing these laws come into effect. And that's where I don't understand it. I feel like that's an attempt to legislate morality in a way that just feels like it's antithetical to what our Constitution provides.
And if I can just piggyback on that, because I'm really surprised right now that the Republican and the Libertarian are the ones saying that you cannot legislate morality. Actually, I'm okay with the Libertarian saying that you can't legislate morality, whereas Thea and I were at least making somewhat of an argument that you can legislate morality up to a certain point, but that point needs to be, rather close to murder. Because it seems, in my experience, that when I see people trying to legislate morality, it seems to come more from the right than the left, in my opinion.
I would argue that recently, probably in the past 8 years, it's been coming more from the left than the right.
Please explain that to me, Dion.
It depends on how you view it. So I'll throw out a counterpoint for like you said. So let's take transgender people, right? And so, again, my personal and the libertarian viewpoint on this is, if you're an adult, that is your body. And if you believe that you are in the wrong body and you want to change that, okay, right? That's your body. Where it starts to get gray and not necessarily you can't do this or you can do this or whatever is when that starts to impact other people. So a prime example, and this will be old news by the time people watch or hear this, but right now I think a fourth school has refused to play against want to say it's like San Diego State University, and
San
forgive
Jose,
me if I got the wrong. San Jose. Okay. I was close.
Like yeah.
But because there's a transgender girl on the women's volleyball team, and now 4 schools have just forfeited against the team, saying we don't want to play. Now, what tends to run along with this story is there is a girl. She's now 19. When she was 17, she was playing high school volleyball against a team that had a transgender girl, and that transgender girl jumped up and spiked the ball into this girl's face so hard that she fell back, got a concussion, and she actually has permanent brain damage now and has lost control of some of her body because of just the impact of that. Now, could another girl have done that? Maybe, right? Like another individual could have been that strong to do that, but the likelihood that somebody who was born biologically male and had that testosterone in their system for some amount of time, developed that muscle mass and everything, the likelihood is going to be greater that person can spike those balls faster, can hit faster, jump higher, whatever. And so my main point here is not the biological differences between men and women. My main point is that the right for that transgender girl to play had an impact on other girls' ability to play and to feel safe. So the gray area is, how do we allow rights for one without impinging the rights of others?
One thing I want to go back to is, or I want to make sure I'm clear, when you said you think it's coming more from the left, and the example you just gave was trans athletes. Was there anything else? Because that one I can address later, but I want to know if there's other examples that's informing your perspective that the morality, the laws that are seeking to regulate morality are more prominent on the left.
I would say probably the big push for DEI across like corporations, schools, wherever, like the whole like DEI enterprise. Mm-hmm. That's definitely coming from the left.
Okay.
And your point on that then is that by pushing for DEI, that infringes someone else's rights?
No. We were talking about trying to legislate morality. Okay. And I just said, I think recently in the past, like 8 years, a lot of it's been coming from the left instead of the right.
No, and that's what I was trying to understand. So like, you're saying basically DEI is based in morality. It's, that the idea of diversity, inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion is more of a moral issue, and that's being pushed from the left. Perhaps I'm not going to disagree with it. I just wanted to understand how you're framing it. The volleyball one is interesting. I was a college volleyball player at the academy. Academy doesn't have a Division I men's team, or they didn't when I was there. So we actually played with the guys, and I have definitely had, we had a guy there a gentleman there when I was playing, and he was like 6'4" and had like a 45-inch vertical. And I was on the receiving end of one of his hits, and it wasn't fun. And so that's why I pushed back on the likelihood of, there are also women, Utah's players. I will say when you get to that level of volleyball, those balls are coming pretty hard and pretty fast. So I don't necessarily agree that the fact that it's a trans athlete, that accident wouldn't have happened, but I appreciate that perspective. Coming back though to when we bring up, I guess the thing that I'm struggling with is the examples that you gave are operating on the fringes of like people's ability to just exist in this world, right? And so when I was mentioning the Don't Say Gay bill, or even the trans rights, and you mentioned like it's different when it's youth, but we know that the suicide rates for trans teenagers are out of either through the roof, right? And if you're the family or the parents of a trans youth and you are seeking to find gender affirming care as a way to keep your teenager alive, the fact that now you're seeing laws become in place that are preventing you from doing that as a family and making those decisions as a family because somebody else that seems to go against their moral values, that's where I just don't understand. To me, that is legislating morality in a way that we're not just talking about your ability to play a sport. We're just talking about your ability to try to keep your child alive. Same thing when you talk about the Don't Say Gay bills. I'll briefly kind of throw out as far as the abortion issue. I had a really, really bad labor experience with my son. I almost died. And I ended up having a horrible C-section, and I will not go into all the details of how I got to my emergency C-section. But I'm one of those people that could have, very easily, my son could have lost his life. I could have lost my life. And, with having lived through that type of experience of seeing what that looks like when the pregnancy has gone terribly wrong, I really struggle with the whole abortion issue and these abortion bans and everything, because to me, it's what's immoral is someone telling me that my life doesn't matter as much as my unborn child, right? Because I was one of those people that had I been in one of those states that had those types of bans, I could have found myself where they would not have acted in certain instances with my pregnancy. And I'm fortunate that I was able to carry my son to term. I'm fortunate that I survived my labor, but it could have gone the other way. And I don't like the idea that my doctor's decisions would have ever been influenced based on a fear of prosecution or violating a law, when it really should have been based on what was medically best for me and my son. And so that's where I get I'm like, how is it even moral? But the fact is, these laws seem to be based on, some kind of black and white, definition that somebody came up with based on their personal moral values, and they being like certain people. Like, I do feel like on the right, there's this push that everyone has to adopt their morality with ignoring the other side. And then that adopting that mentality or adopting those beliefs into our system of laws, it does impact other people's just basic needs and rights to exist. Okay, I'm talking too much, so I'll let you guys please interrupt me.
So I was just going to throw out there too. So, I mean, Deanna, I appreciate the example of the volleyball. I would offer, though, that if that concussion would have happened to a man as well. Like, it's not, when the ball is hit that hard, it's not like the guy's face is that much stronger than the woman's face. Like, if the guy got hit in the face, he also have hit his head and gotten a concussion.
I don't know, because like when we've seen mixed gender like MMA, like when a guy hits a girl, it just hits harder than when a guy hits another guy. I don't know if you've watched it.
No, because in MMA you have weight classes, right? So you wouldn't, if you had a situation where you had a bigger woman with a smaller guy, you could still have that dynamic where you know what I mean? So I think it's not always going to be just based on the gender, but yeah.
To your credit, though, Deanna, I mean, I'm in general, personally, I'm okay with some level of, there's got to be some safety precautions and considerations and things like that made. I personally would be fine with that. I think I'm a little, where I kind of push back on is like these transgender, and for the most part, we're talking about transgender women when these issues come up. But for them to be able to just pursue their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, to just blanket say you can't play sports, to me is too much.
And I agree with you. And that's why I said we have a gray area here where we have to weigh the rights of all individuals involved. Right. And I will say just briefly that, especially at the high school level, this kind of, so right here, we are very close to Loudoun County. And in Loudoun County, they had a situation where there was a 16-year-old biological male who identified as female, went into a bathroom and assaulted a girl. And then that was kept quiet, and that individual was transferred to another school in Loudoun County and then did it again. And so, like, you know, when I briefly toyed with running for school board, and so a lot of this stuff came up last year when we were doing that, right? Because it was the second assault had just happened when I was when I threw my name in the hat. And so it's the kind of things where you go, okay, well, just doing a blanket policy where you just throw open all the doors, I don't think is a good idea, because it does tear down some barriers that allow for amoral people to take advantage of it. And likewise, I agree with you, Will. Like, there are people who are genuinely transgender, and they should be allowed to live their lives. And that means playing sports and using the restroom that you feel comfortable in, and things like that, right? And that's kind of the problem when government tries to sort of come down with this. You know, I said this last week, that a lot of times government just wields this giant hammer, right? And then everything looks like a nail. And where we need nuance, we tend to lack.
I'm confused, though.
But Dion.
Okay. One thing I am confused on
Dion,
is, what are you saying that you think that you support, or you think that some of the laws that are being enacted or pursued that restrict, you know, transgender youth, or that those should be in place, or those shouldn't, or like the Don't Say Gay bill, that is appropriate for the government to take on those type of morality issues, or that shouldn't? I guess I'm not clear, based on how you're explaining your position, where you come down on that.
And Dion, because originally you said we can't legislate morality, and being a libertarian, I'm going to make the assumption that you think a lot of these laws should go away. If all the laws went away, anyone who identifies in either direction could play on any sport that they wanted, and you still wouldn't fix this problem. You would still have someone getting hit in the face with a volleyball, because there would be no rules for or against.
That's true.
Or the same thing with the bathrooms. You could, without rules for or against, people identifying either way are going to go into the bathroom and assault people. You're still not fixing any of those issues.
Yeah, I do agree with you
that's
there.
That's kind of the morality thing, right? Because, again, if you feel it's okay to go in and assault somebody, it doesn't matter what your gender is. That's a problem.
I agree with that.
Right? But that's an internal thing.
I agree with that.
Right? That's the whole thing. That's what it comes back around to, is you can't legislate that morality. It doesn't matter how many laws you write. If someone feels that I'm going to go and I'm going to abuse another human in any capacity, whether you're going to abuse them physically, you're going to abuse them mentally, you're going to abuse them financially, any hardship that you feel is okay to put on another person, you can't legislate that. That's an internal thing. You have to value people and value life. And that's kind of where that comes from. And when we have a society that starts differing from that, and we have a society that's all about the individual and it's my rights and my truth and my way of life needs to be represented, well, again, we've already determined that as humans, we're woefully inadequate at determining or really agreeing on anything. And so this, again, comes back to, yes, there are laws that as a society we have to deem in place to keep law and order as a place. But again, we're confusing by having a law means that it's a moral thing. Well,
I guess I really, this is a genuine question, I'm going to direct it at both Dion and Brett now. So I'll use one example, the Don't Say Gay bill. Do you think that's a law that A, seeks to regulate morality, and B, then does that align with the arguments that you guys have been making thus far? And I'm singling that law out because it's garnered so much attention, and it's been a law that was pushed by the right in the state of Florida. So I'm trying to understand how that framework, like how those types of laws, how they mesh with what your understanding of the Republican Party or even the Libertarian view is, like how those align. Because I'm genuinely kind of like, well, I'm surprised by the way you guys have been framing this, because it doesn't align with what I see as the policies that are set forth and pushed on the right.
Brett, do you want to go? Or I don't know how much you've researched the Don't Say Gay bill.
So I actually haven't. And that's why I was going to kind of let you go first, because I don't know the full ins and outs of it. I know some basics about it. And I mean, just real quick from my standpoint on that is I lean more towards if you're an adult and you want to live your life the way that you want to live it, that's all in fine. But if there's something that is going to impact my children or impact children in general, seriously, guys, we have rules that you can't even drink until you're 21. You can't even vote until you're 18. We have all these things because people are not mentally developed enough to handle those decisions and those activities until that time frame. But yet we're going to completely open these things up to people that are preteens. That's where I don't think the government, the school systems, anything in that nature should be involved in those areas. When it comes to those kind of topics, Thea, you were mentioning, if you have someone who needs transgender care as a family matter, where if you're dealing with a teen, you're doing that, that's a personal thing. And you should be able to seek out care for that. The government shouldn't have any say as to whether you can or cannot get care for your kid. Mm-hmm. Right. Now, whether it's who that's going to be funded by, that's a different issue. Right. Because if you have to pay for that care because it's something you're choosing, well, to me, that's no different than if I'm going to, get any type of elective surgery that I'm going to do. If it's not a medically needed thing to keep me alive. Right. And I know there's a whole area that we could go into with that. We're saying well, if they don't get this care, they're likely to commit suicide. Well, there's nothing physically that's killing them. Right.
Yeah, but the insurance covers all sorts of care that would address those types of, when you have youth that have suicidal ideation, there's so many different medical interventions that you can see that insurance definitely covers. And, And
I would agree that belongs to the insurance company's choice, right? A private company can make that choice.
I'm just saying, I guess the only reason I even brought that up is to say the issue there, I think the prominent issue is that you're seeing bills and legislation that seeks to prevent a family from even being able to make that choice. And so the issue when we talk about are we legislating morality, what I'm looking at is what is the purpose of those laws, but to project someone else's morality onto someone else in society, right? It's not the family who seeks to make that choice. It's someone else telling them, well, we don't agree with that choice because our morals say that to be transgender is wrong, or to allow a transgender youth to seek gender affirming care is wrong. It's against our morals. Therefore, society shouldn't permit it at all. That's where I'm that's what it feels like. You're legislating morality there. And why is that okay? Why is that what we want? That's where I struggle.
So this is where understanding our perspectives is that we've talked about this. We don't personally necessarily agree with all of our party's platforms and policies, right? Yeah. And for me, I am very much about limited government. Government should be only there to do the things for people that they cannot do for themselves, right? And so a lot of these things shouldn't be laws. They shouldn't be discussions in Congress because it's not their place, right? That's where we as a society and people and individuals have to decide those kind of things. And so, when I lean to the Republican side of things, it's not necessarily for the socialists there, because I personally believe a lot of those things should be handled by the community, like we talked about last time. Mm-hmm. So my personal belief is that these things shouldn't be talked about at Congress. It's not their place.
Mm-hmm. But you're
I think that's I'm looking at the time here, and we've talked about this for quite a long time. I think we probably need to wrap up so that we can talk about what's been making us happy this week. Mm-hmm. But I think on a final note, we should go around the horn. On a final note, I think that at least I'm convinced that we can't legislate morality, and legislation is not going to change somebody's morals. As we discussed, if somebody wants to break into your house or break into the girl's bathroom or whatever and commit a crime, they're going to do it. You haven't, by making the laws, you haven't changed their morals. You've just hopefully disincentivized somebody's behavior, which is probably just going to be the law-abiding citizens. And I will throw out there one thing that I wanted to bring up during this topic, which is that even though we shouldn't be legislating morality, I find it interesting that we have we have laws that try to legislate morality, and they're very inconsistent. For instance, you're allowed to kill yourself with tobacco and alcohol all you want. But federally, at least, if you want to do it with marijuana, not allowed, right? Or if you want to try mushrooms or whatever, not allowed. You can't do that. So I find that interesting. The other thing that I find interesting, and I do think that we should probably come back to like abortion, because I think that could be an entire topic. But I did want to say during my research this week, I found 16 states where a person who murders a pregnant woman can be charged with 2 murders or homicides, but also in those states, the woman can seek an abortion. And legally, I find that hypocritical, right? Because either that is a person, in which case killing that person without that person's consent is unlawful, or it's not a person, right? But I don't think the law can just pick and choose. It's a person today, but not a person now. You know what? So anyways, I just want to say, if we're going to try to legislate anything, it should at least be self-consistent.
It's Schrodinger's fetus, right? Depending on when you're observing it, and it could be both at the same time. You know, Dion, that's your point about you can't legislate morality. People are going to do, you know, if people are going to assault someone, they're going to assault someone. The topic that kept ringing in my head was gun laws, right? You can't.
We should talk about those too.
People to stop shooting other people is I imagine what you would say. It's been a good discussion though. I like it.
All right, Theo.
Yeah, I didn't know who it was. I will say, I mean, okay, you guys, as we get to know each other a little bit better, and for the audience, like we don't know each other you guys are getting to know us as we get to know each other. I'm a little frustrated because I think one of my issues that I struggle with when I look at, you know, my friends that are, you know, Republicans, or, you know, they you know, vote Republican and have been very loyal to that party, but then we'll say, you know, well, you know, I don't agree with everything, but some of the things that are being pushed so strongly and the social issues that really have come to the forefront, you know, in recent years, you know, I always struggle. I'm like, well, you know, if that's not what you agree with, how are you supporting a party that's almost what seems to define them to a certain extent? And so this conversation probably just lent more to my frustration and just really not understanding it. Right. And that's good. That's fine. It's not a knock on Brett or a knock on Dion, but it's like, it highlights where I'm like, well, then why are you, if this isn't what you believe, then why are you supporting that thing? Or, and maybe there's other issues that you
do. We need to find a MAGA Republican.
Perhaps. Yeah. I mean, and I mean, that's and the reality is I thought about when we started having these conversations and when I looked at our group, I was like, do we need a MAGA person who is more willing to champion some of the more controversial issues? Because then maybe you get to the heart of it, but I don't know. I will say, full disclosure, most of the people that I knew that have identified themselves as being more on the MAGA end, in the last 8 years, I don't communicate with them or interact with them nearly as much as I did, because they've expressed at some point an opinion about something that I've just been like, okay, they've crossed the line. So I welcome the idea of bringing someone into the conversation, but also know that, you know, it may not be as congenial as what we're doing here. But I think this was a great combo.
I don't know that. I don't know that we could do that, but I mean, I am happy to bring in. So my wife's family is from Texas, and half of that family is from Missouri. So there are a lot of MAGA Republicans on that side of the family, and I have certainly heard their arguments and stuff. I'm happy to give them voice and at least let you know what I think they're thinking and why. And I think I have a pretty good, you know, plenty of Thanksgivings and Christmases and stuff where we've talked about it. So I could at least tell you what they're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, I genuinely want to know and figure, I just want to have a better sense of like, I just hate when I hear people in California just speak about, oh, MAGA X, And it seems like, well, do you even know someone who believes that, or are you just basing it off of what you've seen on TV? And have you asked someone why they believe that, and what it's based in, and how they reconcile whatever conflicts that may exist? That's kind of what I see this conversation, our conversations, to be about, So this was good for me, but it may not have been as satisfying in the end, in the conclusion, but I think this was a good conversation.
So let me to tee up Brett so that you can wrap it up then. Brett, you had said earlier that you don't necessarily agree with everything in the Republican platform, and that some of the social things perhaps were things that you agreed with less. And in my observations, the modern Republican Party is drifting away from the limited government, fiscal conservatism. So why do you still identify as Republican if you don't agree with them as much socially? And I don't know. I'm interested to hear, and then you can turn that into the wrap up.
Sure. So from that standpoint, in Ohio, you do have to be registered as one of the party lines. So I don't have the liberty like Dion does to just have open blanket with that. And there are some key issues that I do lean that direction on, and those are ones that are very important to me. And honestly, I would say when you talk about the Republican Party leaning away from limited government, there's some instances of that. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we saw that especially in the 90s and early 2000s, where, there were wars that were pushed, and, the increase of the industrial military complex. And that's all a power grab, right? That's all trying to increase government. I don't agree with that. Right. That's one thing. Now, yes, I was military. Totally get it. There's a reason to have a strong military force. But some of the growth that we've done and the spending that's been there, it's been unnecessary. Right. And so that, yes, has come from the Republican side of things. But then the other side of it is just some of the unchecked spending that has come from both party lines. Right. Our government in general. Dean and I were having a quick conversation about this before we got started tonight. But just like the spending that is out there in any manner, it's not limited government. I honestly don't think there are any political party lines right now that believe in limited government, at least not the ones that are in power, right? Both sides want bigger government. Right. But, to kind of come back to the MAGA point, most of the Republicans that I communicate with believe a lot more in the lines that I do. Right. We hear about the MAGA ones, and I hear them too. And trust me, I've got a few family members that lean that direction. And conversations are difficult because they're just so set on things, but it's the same. Theo, you kind of mentioned that you hear in California that you have the left side of the party line. They're like, oh, these MAGA people. Well, it's the same thing with some of the MAGA people. They're like, oh, these lefties, right? But everything that they're spouting off is the stuff that the media is putting out there. That's all social media driven. I don't think people really get into conversations like this with their neighbors, with real people, not just TV entities, but real people, to have discussions about this, because I honestly believe the majority of the United States really does kind of toe the center line, right? And we're a little left or we're a little right on things, but it's not like these drastic positions that people have put out. So, yeah, I mean, I think there might be some benefit in bringing some of those perspectives so we can talk about them. But I think if you really get into conversations with the majority of Americans, you're going to have talks like we have here, where there's some level of misunderstanding, but we're really not that far off from each other.
All right, Brett, what's been making you happy this week?
So I had a chance to hang out with some of my business associates this weekend, and that is just always fun. Getting the opportunity to talk about free enterprise and economic freedoms, which is, again, why I am in much favor of limited government, because, hey, I make my money, keep your hands out of it. But just being able to talk about honestly, the hope that I have for the future of America and where we're going, because honestly, a lot of my business associates are in their mid-20s to early 30s, and there's an entire generation that is excited about the economic promises that this country has. And so that's just fun to get around them.
Will?
As I work for Kamala Harris, I too am really hopeful for the economic prosperity of the country, of the future. And I only bring that up because the thing that made me happy this week was, a poll came out that said that Kamala Harris is only 1 point behind Trump in the great state of Florida. And it was, she doesn't need Florida to win. It's not in her strategy. But as someone working on the ground in a campaign that was never designed for Harris, Florida was never supposed to be a battleground. So it felt like what's that phrase, like pushing sand up a hill or something like that. Like the campaign has been rough, and then to see that poll kind of come out, it was just it was heartening, and I was glad to see it.
My what's making me happy is a little different. I like to cook. I'm like really big into trying new recipes and everything. And for years I've said, I'm going to master the Olive Garden soup. One of their soups is they have a soup called Soupa Toscana. It's like a potato and sausage soup. So I've like gone online, looked at different recipes, and I finally mastered the recipe. Like I made it. Everybody in the house was like, this tastes just like the Olive Garden soup. And I felt like a winner. I was like, I have mastered this recipe. It's one of my favorite dishes. Now I don't have to go out and order it in a restaurant. I can make it at home. And that made me happy this week.
I thought you were
awesome. You might have to share that You might have to share that recipe with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. But it was a win. It was when my son was like, "Mom, this is great." I was like, "Yes, it's definitely a win."
Nice. Anytime your kid eats what you put in front of them, that's a win.
That's a win.
All right. So for me, it was actually today. We finally caught a break in the rain. We've been just sitting under the outskirts of Hurricane Helene for like 2 weeks. Just that rain was just constantly coming in. The sun came out yesterday, and it was nice, beautiful. It was like 75 degrees and sunny today. And so when I was on active duty as a brand new second lieutenant, I started a mutual fund that was intended to purchase a very specific German sports car that I had been lusting after ever since I was a kid. And last year I was able to buy that sports car. I paid cash for it, which was nice. So saved for 20 years, bought myself my dream car, and it's a convertible. And I took it out on the road today. Beautiful sunny weather, just top down. And I got to say, it was an expensive car, but there is not a time I get behind the wheel where I don't just have this giant grin on my face. It's like a mini vacation every time I get behind the wheel. So that was what was making me happy.
That's awesome.
All right. I don't think we've got a topic yet picked out for next week. So listeners and viewers, stay tuned, and we will surprise you next week with whatever we decide.
Awesome.
I still say it should be climate change. I'll let you know how I fare after this hurricane.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't help if you're not there to talk about it.
Maybe if I'm not there, you should talk about it more.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Good point. Yeah. All right. Talk to you next time, everybody.
Thanks.